This is the Museum of the West in Grand Junction, Colorado. It looks to be a very sizable museum about regional history and the real Wild West. It's located inside the 1936 C.D. Smith building. Smith operated several drugstores in western Colorado and started a wholesale company, so he eventually built this structure for that venture. An observation tower has been added to the museum. I definitely want to go see the views up there. Out front there's a 1908 portable steam engine that was used for threshing here in the Grand Valley. Today, June 26, 2020, the Museum of the West is having its grand reopening after being closed for over 3 months due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Turns out I am the very first visitor back to the museum. I believe this is the only museum or attraction where I can claim that I was the very first visitor after the historic lockdown of 2020. Of course, the times are a little different now. You have to wear a mask inside and you have to distance from other people. Starting with the Spanish colonists, this is a reproduction of the Martins portolan created by João Martins, the royal cartographer of Spain during the reign of King Philip II. And this map shows what they knew of the New World in the late 16th century. At the top is an Aztec codice, a pictorial manuscript recording either a piece of history, knowledge, or a legend, and there's a Codex Zouch Natal of the Miztecs on the bottom. This is a Santo statue of St. Michael, carved during the Spanish colonial period in Mexico. Here are some Spanish colonial coins from the 16th and 17th centuries that were recovered here in the New World. These are relics recovered from the shipwreck of the El Matancero, a Spanish merchant ship that sank in Mexico with all its precious cargo. There's some replica conquistador armor, as well as an 18th century Spanish swivel cannon. This is a 15th century Spanish cannon. It has very ornate details showing off the Spanish Empire's power during Queen Isabella's reign. There's also a halberd, a very deadly weapon used here in the Southwest, and a reproduction morion helmet. Here are some tools of Spanish colonial horsemen. That's an 18th century ring bridle bit that would jingle while the horse trotted. This is a 4-pound Spanish colonial naval cannon used around 1760. This is a conquistador's hooded stirrup made in the 1400s. Riding boots weren't invented yet, so these would support their shoes better. Here's a Spanish Miquelete flintlock pistol from the 1750s, often carried by soldiers on the northern frontier, which would have been in this region. And there's a spontoon and beat knife from the 17th century. This is a simulated archaeological site in the desert if you were looking for remains of Spanish colonial relics. At this point they certainly wouldn't be this easy to find, but there's a conquistador's armor fragment. That's a muffin button. Those buttons were used on military clothing in the early 1800s. And that looks to be some sort of cannonball. These are some more small Spanish armor fragments. These were probably broken down into smaller pieces to be reused by the Ute tribe to make arrowheads and other objects. They do have an exhibit on the original inhabitants of the West, Native Americans. This is, I assume, a replica petroglyph made by the Fremont people who lived in this region 1,000 years ago. Here are some Fremont artifacts, including a basket, some arrowheads, and even a pilling effigy figurine. Here's some Apache basketry work. There's some really cool patterns on those. These are some artifacts of the Ute tribe, whose reservation is way south of here, more towards Durango and Cortez, Colorado. Here's a display on Ute weaponry. They were quick to adapt to new technologies of the West, and they made some very decorated guns, but they still had decorated stone clubs as well. These are eagle and jaguar warrior flute effigies. A Ute bonnet made around 1920. They use golden eagle feathers on it, and the Ute makes some very impressive beadwork. Here's a room of some more historic, even prehistoric, Native American artifacts. This is an extremely rare and large Hohokam cauldron made sometime between 900 and 1100 CE. Very few of these elongated vessels have survived in such immaculate condition. This display is filled with lots of well-preserved Anasazi pottery. Now we move on to the age of the Mountain Man in the early 1800s. They have a mannequin here in some Mountain Man garb. There's a Mountain Man side notch broad axe used for log cutting, an antler handled knife, a 50 caliber flintlock plains rifle to bring down beaver, elk, and bison, and a cauldron to cook their meat on. They also have a decorated flintlock pistol with an inlaid sun emblem of Louis XIV. This was at one point a French officer's pistol, but a British officer eventually got a hold of it. There's also a skinning knife used along the Green River, and a hunter's clay pipe for some wacky tobacco. These are the Thrailkill swords, a collection of cool old swords from the 18th and 19th centuries. Here's a seriously impressive display of Western firearms used here during the Wild West days. This is going to be interesting. These are rifles used during the fur trading days in the early 19th century. The second from the top is a Kentucky flintlock. Lots of the fur trapping mountain men were Easterners and they would have brought their guns from home. These are all Winchesters. They were considered the perfect lever action rifle and became the primary gun used in the West. At the top right, there's also a Smith & Wesson lever action repeating pistol. This is a Manhattan 36 caliber cap and ball. This type of gun was used to a great extent by Southerners during the Civil War, and this one was owned by pioneer John Lurvy when he homesteaded at nearby Unaweep Canyon. This was Annie Oakley's matched pistol set. They're both two different models of Smith & Wessons. These were presented to Little Miss Sure Shot by her husband Frank Butler in 1890. This Colt Frontier Model 1878 was given as a gift by notorious Chicago gangster Diamond Jack Altry to Garfield County, Colorado Sheriff George Winters. Chicago gangsters like Altry did vacation and purchase ranches around these parts during the 20s. Altry did have a tendency to romanticize the Wild West, so he really liked and respected the local sheriff despite their kerfuffles, so he gave him this Old West style Colt. This Colt pistol was found at a place called Carson's Hole in Unaweep Canyon, and this was believed to have belonged to Kit Carson since it was left at his abandoned camp. But this pistol was manufactured long after Carson's trapping days, so it probably wasn't his. These shotguns were used by the Flegel gang to rob the First National Bank of Lamar, Colorado. The one on the bottom had an illegally shortened barrel. This pistol belonged to Harvey Logan, also known as Kid Curry. He was a notorious outlaw and associate of Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch. In nearby Silt, Colorado in June of 1904, a train robbery Kid Curry and his gang were participating in backfired, and the group of robbers were eventually cornered by a posse. During the shootout, Kid Curry called out, "I'm hit, and I'm gonna finish it now." He took his own life with this .41 caliber Colt revolver. Some people believed he escaped to South America and joined up with the Butch Cassidy gang, where he was kicked in the head by a mule and died. This was Mrs. Meeker's pistol. She was the wife of Indian agent Nathan Meeker. In 1879, Meeker was trying to convert the Utes to sedentary ways, which wasn't too successful, so he eventually called in the US Army. Feeling threatened for obvious reasons and the violation of their treaty, the Utes killed Meeker and other agency employees, and Mrs. Meeker was taken hostage but released 23 days later. This pistol was found at the site of the Meeker massacre. Western women typically had pistols like these. This was George Crawford's Remington revolver. Crawford was the founding father of the city of Grand Junction. During the first days of Grand Junction, he carried this revolver around town while conducting business. This is another Colt from Kid Curry's gang. It was found in a cave somewhere around Grand Valley wrapped in deerskin, and that cave is believed to have been the hideout of Kid Curry and his gang around the time of the fatal train robbery that led to his death. This rusted Smith & Wesson Russian .44 caliber pistol belonged to legendary Gunnison lawman Jack Watson. In 1890, Watson was at a Price, Utah saloon working as an undercover agent, but he had a bit too much to drink and hung his holster and this gun on the back of his bar stool. Well, that gave away his identity, so the Cal Rustler shot him as he staggered out of the saloon. He tried to crawl back in for this revolver, but he was shot again and died. Here's a wall of pistols and revolvers that belonged to Mesa County sheriffs over the years. And this is a Colt Model 1855 military revolving rifle. This rifle was used by the 1st Colorado Cavalry Regiment against the Confederate forces at the Battle of Glorieta Pass in New Mexico Territory during the Civil War. The next room has a display on artifacts that are historic mysteries or just flat out hoaxes. This is the Jensen tablet. It was discovered in 1956 and it appears to be more like a Mayan tablet and unlike anything of the known local peoples throughout history. After much debate, it was discovered that this Mayan-inspired tablet that has actual Mayan symbolism on it was created and buried by a master archaeology hoaxer, J.D. Sterling. This is the Canna Creek Relic. It was proposed to be a fragment of a processional cross from the Dominguez and Escalante expedition of 1776. Instead, it was tested and found to be pure copper, which would be very unusual for the Spanish, and there's elements of the Masonic Knights Templar, including the Pyramid Eye of Providence. So maybe it was from the American Army, maybe the Illuminati, I don't know. It's a mystery. This museum's Western Investigations team set out to find Grand Junction founder George Crawford's safe, which was believed to have been buried under a parking lot somewhere in Grand Junction. When they were finally able to dig for it, they found all sorts of relics like this bottle, but not the safe. It is now believed that Crawford would have thrown his safe down a discontinued cistern for security reasons. That's something he likely learned during Bloody Kansas, so it's possibly even deeper than expected and still has not been located to this day. These are the Kimball Creek floor tiles, which are unusual because they were discovered to be level and of an even thickness. They even had a natural clay mortar between each tile. This flooring may have been purposefully laid out by an unknown early indigenous culture, since nothing else quite like it has been discovered in the region. Now we move back to the Old West days in this section, which is somewhat akin to a Streets of Yesterday style exhibit. These 1910 hose carts were among Grand Junction's first pieces of firefighting equipment. This is the Pioneer Blacksmith Shop. The Smithy's products and metallurgy enhancements were critical in towns like 1890 Grand Junction. Here's a display on Fort Crawford, which was built after the Meeker Massacre for dealing with the Utes and operated from 1880 to 1891. There's a soldier mannequin and some caps. Here's the classic one-room schoolhouse display. Gonna head into the Park Opera House, a tribute to a genuine Old West opera house by that name that operated here in Grand Junction. There's some old costumes in that case. Yonder here is the Wild West style saloon, complete with a piano, lots of revolvers, and a fancy bar counter. I always enjoy these tableaus, and this is a much nicer saloon compared to most I've seen. And here's the old Art Deco post office and boxes of Grand Junction. This is the WAAIME mine, a walk-through uranium mine similar in appearance, non-size, to the many that surround Grand Valley. The country's richest uranium deposits were in this region. There's a uranium minecart which could carry the toxic metal. And here's some luminescent minerals that could be found in the mine. That's really neat. In the early to mid 20th century, Grand Junction was the place to process uranium since this region was so rich in deposits. In fact, about 14% of all the domestic uranium used in the Manhattan Project came from Grand Junction. These are the objects of some early 1900s residents of Grand Junction, many of whom were working in uranium mining and processing. This wooden clock-looking thing was actually a little bank safe bought by Walter Walker in 1890. He was later a Klansman when the Klan got really popular in Grand Junction around the 20s. And here are some artifacts from the World War II era. Here's the old-timey fire truck of Grand Junction. That's awesome. This helmet was used by pilot Eddie Drapula primarily for warmth in open-air cockpits back in the early days of aviation. This is a 1959 Cessna scouting and observation plane used by the Uranium Prospecting Service in the region. This is an aerial uranium prospecting precision scintillator from 1954. This would have been used in the scouting plane to detect possible uranium deposits on the ground. And here's some other various tools used in the uranium industry over the years. There's also a taxidermied mountain lion, the largest cat in Colorado, and I believe they're making a comeback. And here's a taxidermy grizzly bear. Except sadly, there are no wild grizzly bears left in Colorado anymore. The last one was killed in 1979. This is one of the oldest surviving furnishings from the Hotel Colorado in Glenwood Springs, which opened in 1893 and still stands today. This chair was used in the Great Dining Room, where one of America's greatest presidents ate many times. The Museum of the West does have a display on President Theodore Roosevelt, the conservationist president and lover of the American West. These menus are from the President's Hunter's Banquet at the Hotel Colorado. Where President Roosevelt stayed for a while in 1905, it became known as the Little White House during that time. On May 7th of 1905, Roosevelt had a hunter's banquet for his Western Colorado hunting guides and companions, and they had some very fine meats and seafood, if you could imagine. Here is one of the oldest teddy bears. Now, the teddy bear story is very controversial. While many claim that the Roosevelt refusing to shoot a baby bear story happened in Mississippi, locals claimed it happened around Glenwood Springs. Around here, it is believed that the Hotel Colorado maids made the first teddy bear like this out of burlap, rags, and buttons, and they presented it to the president himself. I'm still not sure which one I believe, that requires further investigation. They also have Teddy Roosevelt's pith helmet. That is freaking amazing. He would wear pith helmets like the one on the left on his hunting and scientific expeditions. There's also an antique copy of his history book, The Naval War of 1812, and a photograph of him and his dog Skip here in western Colorado. They also have one of Buffalo Bill Cody's pistols. It is labeled under the trigger Bill Cody 1902. The Great Western Showman would use this Colt to hit targets during the Wild West show. Here's a saddlery. This is a reproduction mud wagon stagecoach. These were extensively used around the 1880s by the Western Colorado stage lines. There's a sawed-off riding shotgun that would have been carried by the stagecoach guard to protect against robbers, and a Colt police pistol that was used by a Wells Fargo guard for protection of their cargo. There's a genuine Wild West lawman's pistol, as well as a ball and chain and a leg iron used on criminals. This miniature diorama shows a Wells Fargo Overland Mail stagecoach making its way through some western Colorado canyon. They better watch out for Kid Curry. That's a 1924 Grand Junction police commemorative saddle. They may have started using cars around that point. This railroad car fragment was used on the Little Book Cliff Railway, which was a pretty innovative railway. It went over a mountain out of Grand Junction for coal and quarried stone runs, and was later used by locals to go to the now extinct Poland Springs Resort. Well, this is an unexpected treat, no pun intended, an exhibit on Alferd Packer, the West's most infamous cannibal. While guiding a group of men in 1874, they got stuck in the San Juan Mountains during the harsh winter, so Packer resorted to cannibalism to survive and ate the 5 other men that were with him. That was Alferd Packer's pistol. It was excavated from the Cannibalist Massacre site near Lake City, Colorado, and I do eventually want to go there and see the site of the massacre. There are still 3 bullets left in there. This gun was likely used to kill at least one of the 5 men he ate. A bullet from this pistol and the lead fragment found under victim Shannon Bell's skeleton were found to be an identical match, despite the various stories he told about the incident. Packer ended up claiming that Shannon Bell had killed the other 4 men and was going to kill him, as depicted in this painting, so he only shot Bell and had to resort to cannibalism to survive, which may very well be the case. And that was Alferd Packer's Wyoming pistol. It is believed to be the weapon he used when he escaped from jail in 1874. He was able to hide from the law for 9 years before being caught, and he was eventually sentenced to 40 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter. That was Alferd Packer's compass. When Packer was moved from the Lake City jail to Gunnison for trial, he left this compass in his cell. They also have a horsehair bridle made by Alferd Packer. After he had eaten his companions during the winter of 1874, he apparently used the rest of that time to become a master horsehair weaver, and he made this one while incarcerated. Well, that's probably the best Alferd Packer collection anywhere, and the whole museum was fantastic. Now I'm gonna head up into the 75-foot tall Sterling T. Smith Education Tower. You have to take a very exciting elevator ride to the top of the tower. Alright, made it to the top of the tower, which offers 360-degree views of the Grand Valley. There's an aerial view of downtown Grand Junction. I do have a video walkthrough of downtown. There's lots of interesting art down there. Those colorful mountains over there are part of Monument Canyon, now Colorado National Monument. I did go there and make a video. It is a spectacular national monument. That building is the Elks Lodge. That is very grand looking. There's the views of Grand Junction and the surrounding valleys to the northeast. Over there is Mount Garfield, named for President Garfield after his assassination. So that was the Museum of the West. I'm very happy it's back open because it is a fantastic museum with some incredible artifacts. This is a must-do if you're in the region. Please like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed this. And also take a look at my other videos on Western history, museums, and national parks. And thanks for watching.